The worst part wasn't the text itself. It was that I read it standing at the kitchen sink, still holding a dish towel, and my first instinct was to check if I'd misread it. I hadn't. My daughter had written, "Mom, I need to be honest with you. Greyson and I talked, and we think it would be better if you didn't come to the lake house this 4th of July. His parents will be there, and we just want it to feel relaxed. You understand, right?" I stood there long enough that the water from the faucet ran cold. Then I turned it off, folded the dish towel the way I always do, in thirds, the way my own mother taught me, and I sat down at the kitchen table. I understood a great many things in that moment. I understood that I had co-signed my daughter's first car loan at 23 when her credit score was not good enough to do it herself. I understood that I had written a check for $11,000 toward her wedding, which I had done quietly and without complaint, even though $11,000 was most of what I had saved that year. I understood that for the past 4 years, since she and her husband Grayson had bought that lake house in Wisconsin, I had paid for the dock repairs, the new water heater, and one summer, an entire roof replacement, because they were stretched thin and I was, as my daughter had said more than once, always so generous, Mom. I understood all of that very clearly. What I did not understand, sitting at that table in my kitchen in Rockford, Illinois, on a Tuesday afternoon in late June, was how I had arrived at this particular moment in my life. I am 64 years old. I worked as a medical billing specialist for 31 years. I raised my daughter, Sable, mostly alone after her father and I divorced when she was 9. I did not date until she was in college because I did not want to bring confusion into her life. I drove her to swim practice 4 mornings a week for 6 years. I helped her move 4 times. I flew out to Portland when she had her appendix out and stayed for 10 days. I was there. I was always there. Grayson had never warmed to me, not really. He was polite, the way some people are polite, the way that means nothing, a surface politeness, the kind you give a waitress or a neighbor you don't intend to know better. In the beginning, I told myself it was just shyness. Then I told myself it was just the adjustment of a new marriage. Then I stopped telling myself things and simply noticed. Sable had changed since she married him, not all at once. Slowly, the way a river changes course, you don't see it happening and then one day you look and the water is somewhere it wasn't before. She stopped calling on Sundays. Then she stopped calling much at all. My text would go unanswered for a day or two. When I visited, which I did twice a year, Grayson was always busy with something in another room, always had somewhere to be by afternoon. One Thanksgiving, he left with his college friends for the entire second day, and Sable spent the afternoon apologizing for him in the distracted way of someone who has stopped believing her own apologies. I noticed. I said nothing, because she was my daughter, and I had decided, a long time ago, that I would be the kind of mother who did not make her child feel guilty for living her own life. But there is a difference between not making your child feel guilty and allowing yourself to be quietly erased. I didn't know that yet, not in those words. I learned it later. The lake house had been a stretch for them from the beginning. Grayson had wanted it badly. He'd grown up going to a lake house every summer with his family, and I think he had the idea that owning one would mean something about the kind of man he was, the kind of life he'd built. Sable had called me excited, the way she used to call me when she was little, and something wonderful had happened at school. "We found it, Mom. It's perfect. It needs some work, but it's perfect." The asking price was $340,000. They had $112,000 for a down payment. The rest would be a mortgage, which was manageable, except that the inspection had come back with a list of deferred maintenance that made the real estate agent wince. Roof, dock, electrical panel, a retaining wall along the back of the property that was showing signs of erosion. I paid for the roof the first summer, $31,000, which I took from my retirement savings and told myself I would rebuild. I paid for the dock repairs the following spring, $6,000, which felt more manageable. The water heater the winter after that, $2,200. I did not keep a running total. I am keeping one now, and I wish I had been more honest with myself sooner. I also let Sable add me to her credit count as a secondary holder, which meant I could use the card when she needed me to buy things for the house. Supplies, contractor deposits, that kind of thing. In practice, what happened was that the card sat in my wallet and I used my own money. Because whenever I mentioned using the card, Sable would say they were trying to keep the balance down. I did not think about this very much at the time. I think about it now. The summer she sent that text, the 4th of July text, I had just gotten off the phone with my financial advisor 2 weeks earlier. He had gone over my retirement projections, and the conversation had been uncomfortable. I was 64. I had planned to retire at 67. The numbers were not where I'd thought they would be. He had asked me gently whether I'd made any large gifts or loans to family members in the past several years. I had not answered him right away. On the drive home from that meeting, I had counted. In 4 years, I had given Sable and Greyson just over $41,000. I had not thought of it as a running total. I had thought of it as the roof, the dock, the water heater. Separate occasions, separate needs. When you add them up, they become a different thing entirely. I hadn't added them up before. So when that text arrived 2 weeks later, "We think it would be better if you didn't come," I was already sitting with something uncomfortable. Something I had not yet named. I called Sable that evening. She answered on the third ring, and I could hear Greyson in the background, the television, the sound of a comfortable evening at home. "I got your text," I said. "Mum, I knew you'd make this a thing." I was quiet for a moment. "I'm not making it anything. I'm calling to understand." I explained it in the text. "You said you wanted it to feel relaxed." "Right. And I make it not relaxed." There was a pause. "Grayson's parents are coming, and look, it's complicated. You know how he gets." I did know how he gets. I did know how he got. I had been watching how he got for 6 years. "Sable," I said, "I have a question and I need you to answer it honestly." "Mom, how much money have I given you and Greyson since you bought that house?" The silence on the other end of the line was a specific kind of silence. The kind that tells you the other person knows exactly what the answer is. "That's not fair," she finally said. "You offered." "I did," I said. "I'm not disputing that. I'm asking you to tell me the number." She didn't tell me the number. She said I was being hurtful. She said she knew I would do this eventually. She said she'd call me in a few days when I'd had time to calm down, and then she ended the call. I sat in my living room for a long while after that. The windows were open. It was a warm June evening, and the neighbors had their sprinkler going, and I could hear children somewhere down the block. I was not angry, not exactly. I was something quieter than anger, something more like clarity. The next morning, I drove to my bank and met with a personal banker named Rosalind, who I had worked with before. I asked her to help me close the joint credit card account, the one with Sable's name as primary. I had to show identification and explain that I was the co-applicant requesting removal of my name. It took about 40 minutes. Rosalind was professional and did not ask questions I didn't invite. Then I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down every dollar I could account for. The roof, the dock, the water heater, the retaining wall they'd needed 2 seasons ago that I'd half forgotten about, contractor deposits I'd charged to my own card, the 11,000 for the wedding, the car loan cosign. The car was paid off now that my credit had carried that risk for 4 years. The total was more than I'd said to myself, even in the car after the financial advisor meeting. I stared at that number for a while, then I flipped to a clean page and wrote a different kind of list. I wrote down what I needed for my retirement to look the way I'd planned, what I needed to make up. Whether I was going to be okay. The answer to the last question was, probably, if I was careful now, only if I stopped. I had a friend from my billing days, a woman named Rosemary, not the Rosalind from the bank, a different person, and she had gone through something similar with her son several years before. We had lunch that week. I told her what was happening, and she listened the way good friends do, without rushing toward advice. And then she said something that stayed with me. "You didn't give her that money, expecting repayment," she said. "But you did give it, expecting to still be her mother. And she's trying to renegotiate the terms without telling you that's what's happening." I thought about that for days. I also thought about the lake house. Specifically, I thought about something Sable had said casually 2 summers ago when I was visiting. Greyson had been in a good mood that weekend, rare enough that I remembered it, and he had mentioned that the lake house had appreciated. He said the neighborhood was getting popular. He said they could probably sell for well over what they'd paid. He had not said, "Thank you for the roof that helped maintain that value." He had not said anything like that at all. He had said it the way someone talks about something that belongs entirely to them. I went to the county assessor's website that evening after my lunch with Rosemary. Wisconsin property records are public. I looked up the lake house. The current assessed value was $487,000. I sat with that number. Then I called my own attorney. I had used her for some estate planning several years before. A straightforward woman in her 50s named Barbara who did not use more words than necessary. I explained the situation. I asked about my options. She asked me several questions. Was my name on the deed? No. Had I documented the money I'd given? Not formally, no. Had any of it been in writing as a loan versus a gift? No. She was quiet for a moment. Then legally, she said, you're in the position of someone who gave gifts. There's no mechanism to recoup gifts. But that's not actually your question, is it? No, I said. My question is whether there's anything I'm currently legally obligated to do for them, going forward. None, she said. You have no legal obligation. The credit card, you're removing yourself. Already done. Good. Anything else in your name associated with their property or finances? I thought. Not that I'm aware of. Then going forward, she said, you're free. I hung up and sat with that word for a minute. Free. It was a strange word for something that felt like this. The 4th of July came and went. I did not go to the lake house. I went instead to my friend Rosemary's backyard, where she had a small cookout with her sister and a few other women we'd both known for years. We ate potato salad and watched fireworks from her back porch, and I felt, unexpectedly, something close to peace. Sable did not call. She sent a text on the 5th. Hope you had a good holiday. I responded. I did. Thank you. That was all. In August, I did something I'd been thinking about for 2 years but kept putting off. I called my financial advisor back and told him I was making some changes. I asked him to model what my retirement would look like if I made no further large gifts to family. He ran the numbers. The difference was significant, meaningful. I also called a realtor, not about the lake house, about my own home. My house in Rockland was a 4-bedroom colonial that I had rattled around in alone for the better part of a decade. 2 of those bedrooms had been functionally empty since Sable moved out, one serving as an office and the other as a room that I kept meaning to do something with. My house had appreciated too, not as dramatically as the lake house, but enough. I was not planning to sell immediately. I was planning to understand my options. There is a difference, and I had spent too many years not understanding my options. In September, Sable called. A real call, not a text. It was a Sunday afternoon, which surprised me. She asked how I was. I said I was fine. She talked about work for a few minutes, and about the garden she'd been trying to get started. I asked questions and listened, and it was almost like before, almost like the calls we used to have. Then she said, Greyson and I have been talking about expanding the dock. There's a company that does it before the season ends and they need a deposit by October. I was quiet. Mum, I heard you, I said. It would be about 8,000. We could do the rest ourselves, but the deposit is. Sable, I said. I'm not going to be able to help with that. Another specific silence. Oh, she said. Then, okay. I've made some changes to how I'm managing my retirement, I said. I should have made them sooner, but I'm making them now. She said she understood, in the voice of someone who did not understand or did not want to. She said she'd let me know how it went. The conversation ended not long after. I expected to feel guilty. I had been expecting that guilt the way you brace for a wave. It didn't come, not the way I expected. What came instead was something quieter, a kind of recognition. The recognition that I had been waiting for someone else to tell me I was allowed to stop. That I had been waiting for Sable to say, Mum, you've done enough. You should keep that money for yourself. And she was never going to say that. Not because she was a bad person, but because we had built a pattern together, she and I, and patterns don't announce themselves as patterns until you're standing outside them. I was standing outside it now. October came. I took a week off and drove to Asheville, North Carolina, which I had always wanted to see. I stayed at a small inn, ate at restaurants I picked myself, walked the downtown in the mornings when it was still cool. I bought a watercolor painting from a woman at a Saturday market, a mountain scene, all soft blues, and I carried it carefully back to my car and drove it home. I hung it in the room I had been meaning to do something with. Sable called in November, around Thanksgiving. She and Greyson were going to his parents' place in Michigan. She asked what I was doing. My friend Rosemary invited me to her sister's, I said. Her whole family does a big thing every year. I've been going the last couple. Oh, she said. Good. Yes, I said, it is. I don't tell this story because I am angry at my daughter. I have worked very hard to be honest with myself about that. And the truest thing I can say is, I am not angry. What I feel is more like the specific sadness of understanding something you wish you'd understood differently, earlier, when there was more time to do something about it. What I wish I had understood is that generosity, given without limits, does not build closeness. It builds expectation. And expectation, over time, has a way of becoming entitlement without anyone intending it to. I gave my daughter a great deal. I gave her what I could. And then some. And somewhere in that process, without either of us naming it, I became a resource rather than a person. I became the one who could be called on. And the distance between the one who can be called on and the one who doesn't need to be included is shorter than you would think. I am not a resource. I am a 64-year-old woman who worked for 31 years and raised a child, and has a watercolor painting on her wall from a Saturday market in Asheville. I am going to be okay. I know this because I have run the numbers. I know this because I have sat across from my financial advisor and heard him say, with some relief in his voice, that I am back on track. I know this because I spent a week alone in Asheville and liked it more than I expected to. I know this because Rosemary laughed so hard at Thanksgiving dinner that she spilled sweet tea on her sister's tablecloth. And I laughed too, and it was real. My daughter and I still talk. It is different now, and I think we are both finding our way in that difference. She has not asked for anything since September. I have not offered. We are learning, maybe, to just be mother and daughter again. Not banker and borrower, not giver and receiver, just two people related to each other who are trying to figure out what that means now. I don't know if we'll get there. I know I'm keeping the door open, but I stopped holding the door open with my wallet. And that is the first honest thing I have done for both of us in a very long time. I'd thought a lot about why it took me so long to see what was happening, and the honest answer is that I didn't want to see it. Because seeing it meant admitting that I'd played a role in building it. That the pattern between Sable and me hadn't been forced on me. It had grown slowly, with my participation, my silence, my willingness to write another check rather than have a harder conversation. That's not easy to sit with. But I've learned that sitting with uncomfortable truths is the only way to actually change anything. What I know now is this. Every action we take teaches the people around us how to treat us. Not through one big moment, but through 100 small ones. Every time I paid without being asked to. Every time I said, of course, when I should have said, let me think about that. Every time I swallowed my own needs to keep the peace. I was teaching my daughter that my needs didn't matter. I wasn't doing it consciously. I was doing it out of love. But love without honesty is not the same thing as love. It's just a long way of avoiding conflict. And conflict avoidance is not the same thing as kindness. The day I called my attorney Barbara and heard her say the word free, I realized I had been waiting for someone else to give me permission to stop. Waiting for Sable to notice. Waiting for Greyson to say thank you. Waiting for some moment that was never going to arrive, because they had no reason to create it. We don't question systems that work in our favor. That's just human nature. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm saying I had built a system and I had to be the one to dismantle it. That's the part that required real courage. Not anger, courage. Because it would have been much easier to stay comfortable, to keep writing the checks and telling myself it was fine. It was love, it was what mothers do. The hard thing was choosing honesty over ease, even when the honest choice meant loss, even when it meant sitting alone in my living room on a warm June evening, listening to other people's children play outside. Rosemary told me something I come back to often. She said that we don't give to create debt, but we do give, expecting to remain in relationship. And when the relationship changes and we keep giving anyway, we're not being generous anymore. We're just hoping our way back to something that may have already shifted without us. I think that's right. The watercolor painting I bought in Asheville is still on my wall. I look at it most mornings. It's a small thing, but I chose it entirely for myself without asking whether anyone else would like it. without calculating what it cost against what else it could have done. I just liked the way it looked, and I bought it and I brought it home. That's the version of me I'm trying to keep. The one who takes up her own space. The one who is generous because she wants to be, not because she's afraid of what happens if she stops. I don't have a neat ending for this story. Sable and I are still finding our way. I hope we get there. But I have stopped making myself smaller so that getting there feels easier for her. That is the one thing I know with real certainty that I will not go back on.